Oh, Daniel-san, do you know the anatomy of the head and neck?
No, Mr. Miyagi. I gave up on my college in order to go to Japan with you. Could you please teach me?
Tell me, Daniel-san, what do you know about the frontal region, the oral region, the nasal region, your salivary glands? What do you know about what's in your mouth?
I'm telling you, Mr. Miyagi, I do not understand a word of what you just said. How is this going to help me with my karate? How is this the Miyagi way?
Daniel-san, shut up. Stop moving. Where are you going? I said stop moving. Daniel-san, listen. In a fight, you must know where you need to hit your opponent.
Wait, I thought we were talking about anatomy. Hey, yo! Mr. Miyagi, I need this more than college.
I have instilled in you the ancient techniques.
What ancient techniques?
Shut up! In this video, you will learn all the regions of the head, all the bones within your body, all the nerves within your head, and all your salivary. Hey, no need to thank me so quick. As I was saying, you are going to learn the salivary glands and your head's blood supply. So I know you may be asking, what does all that mean? And I think we should first start with the portions of the head. So starting with your frontal region, this is going to be home to your frontal lobe and also your frontal bone. So your frontal bone, that's basically going to include your forehead, and then it's going to seep a little bit into your nose bridge. So it's basically everything above your eyebrows, including the top portion of your nose bridge, and that's going to protect your frontal lobe, which is the biggest portion of your brain, which is in charge of your personality, your emotions. It's in charge of your creativity. It's basically, that's where most of you comes from. That's how you are on the inside. That comes from your frontal lobe. Don't worry, guys. I have a short attention span too, so for this next segment, we're going to be watching some Subway Surfers gameplay. Up next is going to be the parietal region of your head. This is going to be home to your parietal lobe and your parietal bone. Your parietal bone, this is going to be basically at the midline of the posterior section of your head. For layman's terms, that's going to be the middle of the back of your head. And this is home to your parietal lobe. And what that is in charge of is your sensory information. This is how you perceive touch, smell, hearing, all of that. And it also controls certain body movements. Coming in at third place, no, I'm just kidding, this is not a ranking, we have our temporal region. This is going to be home to your temporal lobe and bone, which is located near your temple. And what the temporal lobe does is it processes sound, it processes your memories, processes language recognition, and it helps control your emotions. Sadly, that's enough of the Subway Surfers. Hopefully I have your attention, and we're going to continue with the auricular region, and that's the visible part of your ear, and that's where your sound goes in. Alright, now we're introducing the orbital region of the head, and what this does is it protects your eyeball, and I hope you know what your eyeball does, but if you don't, it's what you see out of. That's what brings in the light and all that, and that's how you see everything. That's how you're seeing this project. And basically what this does is it protects that eyeball, and then it allows it to see, in a 3D scope of view instead of just like a 2D, like a fish eye view. Alright, so next up we're going to have our nasal region. Hopefully you drew the connection that nasal, nose. This is going to host your nose, your nasal cavity, your sinuses, your nasal lymph nodes, and this is basically what's going to help you smell. Alright, next we have another easy one to remember. This is going to be your oral region. This is going to be your mouth, your lips, your tongue. This is going to include your salivary glands, your taste buds, your palate, and your buccal mucosa. And I hope you've been paying attention to the location of all these places because we have an activity coming up fairly soon. Now, I don't want to make this seem like I'm yapping on forever, so up next we're going to have a speed round of everything that I missed out on, because these are going to be your less important spots, not because they don't have much of a function, but rather because there's not much I could find on them, so what they might be is just a bone. Up first is the zygomatic region. This is going to be home to your zygomatic bone. Next is the occipital region. This is going to be home to your occipital bone, but one fun fact is it is connected to the auricular region by the posterior auricular nerve. Again, we have the infraorbital region. This is going to be right under your eye, and there's not really much right under your eye. And once more, we have the buccal region. The buccal region, that's basically going to be your cheek. Tell me one thing important about your cheek besides looks maxing. Sorry about the cringe, but lastly we have your mental region, which is just going to be your chin. Alright, so for our first activity, we are going to map out all the regions of the head on a diagram. So, coming up, we're going to have a blank diagram, and then if anyone wants to volunteer, feel free. If nobody volunteers, I have a wheel with everybody's name ready. And what you're going to do is map out the region you pick from the head, and if you get it right, I'll have some prizes for you. If you get it wrong, I have a wheel full of punishments that are school appropriate and can be done in this class. Alright, so next up we're going to be going over all the bones within your head. You're going to be responsible for knowing 28 bones, so this might be a little lengthy. And that's going to be split into 3 categories, being neurocranial bones, which is going to be your brain, your auditory bones, which is like your middle ear, and then your viscerocranial bones. That's going to be your face. Alright, so up first, we're going to go over a neurocranium, and you're going to need to know 8 bones from here. 1 ethmoid bone, 1 sphenoid bone, 1 frontal bone, 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, and 1 occipital bone. Alright, so I know we've already talked about the frontal bone, but for this we're going to go a little deeper into it. So what we know already is that the frontal bone is your forehead. And stuff we can add on to it is that there's 2 cavities within your frontal bone, 1 above each eye, and then the frontal bone, as already said, basically makes up the roof of the bone protecting your eyes. Here we have your pairs of parietal bones. There's not really much to be said about these bones besides it makes up most of the roof of your cranium. And as you can see, these bones meet at a line in the middle of your head called the sagittal suture. Coming in next, we are going to have our occipital bone. This is basically going to make the back and bottom of your skull. And really the only notable thing about this is you're going to have your spinal cord pass through a little hole at the bottom of your occipital bone called the foramen magnum. This is your temporal bone. This is a pair of 2 bones on each side of your head near where your ear is going to be, and their main function is basically to make up the base of your cranium. Here we're going to have your sphenoid bone. This is personally my favorite looking bone because it has little 2 wing things on each side. And this isn't a pair of bones, this is actually 1 bone that has a base running through. And onto our most complex bone, this is going to be the ethmoid bone. This is probably going to be the hardest to remember, but what you basically need to know is that this bone is going to make up the floor of your orbit, the floor of your nasal cavity, and the floor of your cranium. And basically, one thing about this bone is it was very hard to find a model of, so please ignore the watermarks. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, so here's a joke from growingfamily.co. Why did the skull feel lonely? Because he had no body. Okay, I'm sorry. But, moving on to your auditory bones, you only really need to know 3 since they all come in pairs. This is your malleus, your incus, and your stapes. And the best thing about your auditory bones is you really only need to know the name, not the function. But I can't just leave it at that, so you're going to want to know the functions. And all 3 of these work together in order to get sound from outside into your inner ear, and it goes from your malleus, which gets the initial sound, that then travels to your incus, which then brings it over to your stapes, and your stapes takes that sound and puts it into your inner ear. That was pretty short, but now we need to move into your 14 bones of your visceral cranium. And first we're going to start with your mandible, which is basically going to act as your jaw that's going to facilitate, movement of your mouth, because you can't move the top of your mouth, only the bottom. Next, we have the vomer, which is going to form the base of your nose. And then you have a pair of nasal bones, which is going to form your nose bridge. Next, you have your pair of lacrimal bones, which is going to make the inner angle of your eye. After that, you have your pair of zygomatic bones, which is going to make up your cheek and inner orbit. And then you're going to have your nasal conchae, which is going to make up the interior of your nose. And next, you're going to have a pair of palatine bones, which is going to form the floor of your nose. And lastly, we're going to have our pair of maxilla bones, which is going to form our upper jaw. Okay, so that's going to conclude the section where we go over the bones in your face. Now, I know that's where your study guide ends, so just take some quick notes for what's next to come. And what we're going to do is we're going to move into our salivary glands now. Okay, so let's first go over saliva. What is saliva? We all know that watery substance within your mouth that kind of stinks, It's not really the most pleasant substance to look at, but most of that is just water, and then 1% of your saliva is minerals and solids and stuff like that. But you might ask, if it's 99% water, what makes spit thicker than water? Like, you might notice when you spit out, it doesn't really look like water. And that's because as it leaves your mouth, your saliva is going to mix with your mucus, and that's going to cause that substance you know as spit. Okay, so I'm going to get sidetracked for like a quick portion, so please bear with me. As some of you might know, I recently became an uncle, and one thing I noticed while babysitting my niece is that she always has drool coming out of her mouth, for no reason apparently at all. So that's left me with the same question over and over on why the heck do babies drool? So I did a little research, and one thing that came up is, number one, we all know that babies are underdeveloped, They come out the womb, they don't have all their muscles, they don't have every function. We're not going to give birth to Superman, but one thing that they don't have is swallowing muscles. So their pharyngeal muscles are not really at their peak capacity, their peak capabilities. So what that causes for babies not to be able to swallow, and what that leaves is the saliva to just puddle there. It puddles in their mouth. Okay, so now what does saliva do? Saliva is going to have three main functions. Number one, we are going to have moistening your food, so basically, without saliva, you wouldn't be able to survive a Popeye's biscuit. Number two, it's going to aid in your digestion. There's enzymes within your saliva that just kind of helps with that. And number three, it's going to keep your mouth clean. It's water, let's be honest, so it's going to keep your mouth clean. Okay, so we're going to have three major salivary glands, being your sublingual gland, your submandibular gland, and your parotid gland. And what you're going to want to know for these three is, number one, you're going to want to know where the gland is, what the gland's called, and then you're also going to want to know what kind of duct your gland corresponds to, so like what is, the passageway for the saliva. And number three, you want to know what type of saliva it excretes, so that's what we're going to go over, starting with the sublingual gland. Okay, so we're going to go over these a little quickly. There's going to be an activity at the end. So we're not going to go over the location, but the sublingual gland, it's connected to Bartholin's duct, and that's going to produce your mucus. That's going to excrete mucus. Okay, next up we're going to have your submandibular gland, and what that's going to be connected to is your Wharton's duct, and that produces your mixed secretions. Okay, so lastly we're going to have your parotid gland, and what your parotid gland is going to be connected to is your Stenson's duct, and that's going to produce your Serous secretions. Okay, so I know I've been talking for a long time without really anything fun to say or do, so what we're going to do is a quick pop-up activity for a prize or punishment. Hopefully we have some volunteers, we can always spin the wheel of names, and what I want you guys to do is I'm going to name one of the three salivary glands, and I want you to tell me where it is based on just your knowledge of medical terminology. Okay, so I don't want this to be a 30-minute lesson, so what we're going to do is we're going to quickly brief over the blood supply. We're not going to go too deep into it, and then we're going to move into the landmarks of the face, and that should be the end of it. Okay, so now for the blood supply of the head, you're going to need to remember everything on... Not playing. What you will need to know, though, is that everything's going to start at your external carotid artery, and from there it's going to branch into your maxillary arteries. I hate the word artery. It makes me feel like I have a speech impediment. Okay, so these are your maxillary arteries, but the main ones you're going to want to know are your infraorbital artery, your posterior superior alveolar artery, your anterior superior alveolar artery, which I'm pretty sure isn't pictured here. You're going to want to know your inferior alveolar artery, and then you're also going to want to know your incisive artery. Now, I know that was really quick, and you might not have caught that, but these will come up on a later day, I'll tell you that, and I just don't want this to be too long of a lesson because we're going to head into another big portion. Which, speaking of big portions, we are going to now head into your landmarks of the face. Okay, so number 1 and 2, that's going to be your canthus, or you might have heard of it as a canthal tilt, if you've been keeping up with, media trends recently. And what that is just going to be the outer and inside portion of your head, respectively. So number 1, that's your outer canthus, and number 2, that's your inner canthus. Alright, so number 3, we're going to have your ala of the nose, and that's going to be that outer portion of your nostril that kind of just bulges out a little bit. This is made up of 3 layers of skin, being your skin, cartilage, and mucosa. Okay, number 4 is going to be your philtrum, and there's not really much to say about it. It's just kind of that, indentation in the middle of your upper lip. That's about really all there is to it. Okay, so number 5, that's the tragus of the ear. And what your tragus is if you quickly feel up where you might see that number, you're going to feel a little bump in your ear. And that's your tragus. And you can actually get that pierced, such as Scarlett Johansson and Rihanna both have a tragus piercing. And that's really all there is to say about it. Alright, number 6, that's going to be your nasion. and I want you to quickly feel right above the bridge of your nose, and that's where you're going to find your nasion. And one cool thing about your nasion is that's where your frontal bone, your right nasal bone, and your left nasal bone all meet at that one small point. Alright, so we just covered the nasion. Now I want you to touch right above your nasion, and what you're feeling right now is your glabella. And one cool thing about your glabella is you might actually develop glabella lines if you're a very expressive person. So facial expressions such as frowning can actually cause you to form lines there. Alright, now for number 8, that's the root of your nose. That's going to be right below your nasion if you want to feel it. And basically, one cool thing about your root of your nose is during plastic surgery, that's actually where they're going to modify in order to, improve your side profile. Okay, now number 9, that's going to be your septum. And what you're going to want to know about your septum is it's that piece of cartilage in between your two nostrils that just separates the two chambers of your nose. And for the 2 people that are going to that one goth convention coming up, just know a septum piercing is something you're going to see a lot, and that's basically just getting a piercing in between your septum that you might have seen as like those 2, kind of like a bull's ring. Number 10 is going to be your anterior nares, which I know sounds like a big word, but what that basically is more commonly referred to is your nostrils. And one thing funny about your nostrils is you're never actually breathing out of both of them at the same time unless you force it to happen, because one of them likes to be closed at all times. It's kind of annoying. And one theme you're going to notice is I'm going to be using a lot of big words. And basically what that boils down to is those are just the medical terms, such as at number 11, we're going to have your mental protuberance. And what that is your chin. That piece of just jaw that kind of sticks out. It's kind of like a triangle. And then fun thing about it is scientists still debate what causes the shape of your chin. Because number 1, of course, genetics. But number 2, there's actually been a study that diet is a big factor in how your chin comes out. At number 12, we're going to have the angle of your mandible, and I want you to quickly feel up your jawline. And once you reach right before your jawline meets your neck, you're going to feel that little round curve. That's the angle of your mandible. And something funny about this is it actually decreases with age. So you might notice that old people are kind of always in a frown. That might be why. And lastly, at number 13, we have your zygomatic arch, and this is also known as your cheekbone. So it has a couple functions to it, such as holding up your face structure. It also facilitates chewing, and then it's also going to protect your eyes from underneath because it's right below your eye socket. And I guess one thing about it is, a lot of models, the zygomatic arch is a really prominent feature in models because they have really high cheekbones. So it's kind of a big bone in the modeling industry. And that's going to conclude our lesson. And before everything's over, I just want to do one more activity. So we're going to split into 3 groups of 8. And then I'm going to hand out a blank diagram of the landmarks of the face. And I want you guys to fill that out. And the first team to fill that out will get $1 each. And the other 2 losing teams are going to have to do a punishment.